welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast, which is brought to you and sponsored by the Timeline app. Timeline is a state-of-the-art retirement income planning software that helps financial planners like me bring your retirement journey to life and answer your big retirement income questions. This week, I am delighted to welcome Greg Davies to the show. Now, Greg is a globally recognised expert in behavioural finance. And hopefully he'll explain what on earth that is. And its impact upon our financial well-being. He holds a PhD from Cambridge University, so he's far cleverer than I, and is also a specialist in both the theory and practice of investment risk profiling. Thanks for joining me, Greg.
Absolute pleasure. How are you?
Very well, thank you. I've just remembered where we met, actually. Yourself, I don't know if you remember this, but we met at Canary Wharf I think it must have been 8 and 10 years ago, when you were speaking at a City of Westminster event. I was with Dennis Hall, and we went for a beer. And we sat in the sunshine, the rare sunshine, and I remember having a great conversation with you. So I don't know if you remember that, but
I do indeed, yes.
So it's quite a while ago, and things have. I think I've got a feeling you may have been at Barclays at the time.
I think if it was that long ago, I certainly was. I was at Barclays until 2016. So. Right.
And what was your role at Barclays?
I'm sorry.
What was your role at Barclays?
So, interestingly, I joined Barclays specifically in order to set up a behavioural finance team, way back in 2006, and it was really the world's first dedicated team of behavioural finance geeks inside a bank anywhere in the world.
Wow.
And this was kind of when behavioural finance was still considered to be the lunatic fringe of the economics faculty. And to be entirely honest, I think we were an experiment. No one entirely knew what a behavioural finance team was going to do or what its point was, but this was pre-crisis, and all the banks had a lot more money than they have now, about the same amount of sense, and they decided that they wanted to start a behavioural finance team. And I was in the fortunate position that I was one of the few people in the UK who had recently finished a PhD in that, plus had some previous commercial experience. So, right place, right time.
Absolutely. So, for those who don't know what behavioural finance is, because it's probably not a term that most people hear in their day-to-day lives, what is it?
Well, I think of behavioural finance as really being a mashup of economics and psychology. It's trying to use an understanding of human psychology mixed with our understanding of economic decision making to try and study how and why do people make the decisions they really do. And we need to contrast that with standard economics, which basically assumes everyone's perfectly rational all the time and tells people about the decisions they should make without really paying much attention to whether people find that easy or difficult to do. So behavioral economics or behavioral finance is saying, how do we understand the decision-making people go through in their day-to-day existences? How do we understand how personality and psychology influences that? And most importantly, in what we do, how do you use that knowledge to help people make better decisions?
Yeah. So of course, we're very privileged in the work that we do. We work with people who are entering retirement. They've generally got quite a lot of assets because they've got complexity, they've worked hard over their lives, and they've probably done pretty well. So there's some questions I want to ask about how they make decisions of you in a second, but one of the other things that really interests me is youngsters. I was, and obviously I was fortunate. I started in this business in my 20s, and my managing director of the time, Martin, said, you need to pay into a pension. You need to start saving some money. And it was kind of like, really? I'm 20, okay. And some tax reliefs, and it all seemed worthwhile, and he gave me some guidance. Now, I appreciate, against myself and my pals, I was the only one contributing. I was the only one doing something. And I look at this decision-making process that probably most people are going through, that they're, if you look at in your 20s, what your household bills are, your subscription to Netflix, to your gym membership, to your maybe a football club ticket, annual ticket, what have you. saving for the long term is probably not that high on priority. Now, of course, what we've started to do, we're nudging people, aren't we? We're auto-enrolling them now into pension schemes, which is fantastic. But is it possible? Could you educate people well enough to kind of to make those what we know to be sensible decisions in their 20s?
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly embarrassed by how late in my life I started investing, putting money into a pension, etc. And here's the problem. I don't think that education is the main issue here, because if I just take my own case, I had a degree in economics. I had worked in financial services. It wasn't the fact that I didn't know that I should be somewhere out there saving for a pension. This is, it was in the back of my mind, I knew this. It's really that I couldn't be bothered to get around to it because I had other priorities, as you put it. So I don't think that education is going to work. I also don't think that sort of scaring people into it is going to work, because in your 20s you think you're invincible, and it's just too far away to be relevant. And that's why things like auto-enrollment and nudging, etc., are so vitally important, particularly for that age group, because most people really don't put their heads up above the financial parapet to pay attention to what they're doing until they have some big life event, until they get married, they have a kid, a parent dies, something that drives them to suddenly go, oh, hang on, now I've got to start thinking about this. And I genuinely don't think there are any shortcuts to making people think about that consciously early in life, where it just is not going to be a priority relative to all these other things. So I think auto-enrollment and nudging is absolutely vital. There is a problem with it, however. The minute you automatically enroll someone into something, firstly, they automatically get the default option, which by definition is approximately wrong for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And it's better than nothing, but it's not right. It's not the best thing to do. So the first thing is auto-enrolling. You have to then follow up and go, now that I've got someone in, and maybe I just have to accept that in their 20s that's all I'm going to be able to do. But I've put in place a safety net. In their 30s, now I have to start engaging. Because the other problem with automatic enrollment and nudging is it gives people the sense that someone else has solved the problem for them. Someone clever has thought about this, they've automatically enrolled me into something which I'm sure is absolutely right, and I don't have to worry about it. So there's a knock-on consequence from nudging and automatic enrollment, which is it's actually an invitation for people to disengage even further from their finances. And they can disengage right up until they hit the age of 60, 65, they retire, and then suddenly they have a fiendishly complex problem to solve that they haven't paid any attention to for the last 40 years. So as an answer to your question, I don't think there's a great deal we can do to genuinely inspire most of the people in their 20s to take finance that seriously, to take personal finances that seriously. And there we have to give them the safety net. We have to do some things for them. But we have to realize that that hasn't solved their longer-term problem. And we've got to find those ways of re-engaging them before they hit 55.
Yeah. So one of the tools that I use, let's say someone has amassed a small amount of savings in pension terms. Let's say they've saved within a pension £10,000. They've been lucky enough for their company to be contributing. They've maybe been working for a company for 10 years, and there's £10,000 in there. And you're right, they still don't engage with it. I mean, I know people who just wouldn't even open their pension statements. In fact, as soon as they see the pension provider on the top of the envelope, it's kind of filed. It's like, what does it mean to me? And that can be from quite qualified, highly educated people, but because they're in whatever role they're in, you're right, they disengage. So I asked them the question. I said, okay, so let's just put that £10,000 in a bag over the other corner of the room. Just imagine it's in that satchel over there in cash. Now do you care about it? Yeah, I do. Okay. How thoughtful, if I said to you, you're not allowed to go and spend it in the high street, but you can spend it by making a decision about where that's going to be invested for your future. how much care will you have with it? You've got 10 grand there. How much care are you going to make sure that when you go and spend it tomorrow by buying an investment with it, are you going to think about that, or are you just going to toss it over to somebody else? And they generally will then say, well, actually I will consider it. So I think turning it into something tangible in their own minds, even if it's only imaginary, it's a big bag of cash, it sometimes kind of focus the minds that actually you are making this decision on a continual ongoing basis. Every year you get that statement, you need to think about that it's growing to 12 grand, it's growing to 15 grand. Where do I spend that 15 grand today?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, making things visceral, making things tangible will focus people far more on it. And that's, one of the big problems with anything that happens automatically is it's out of sight, out of mind, and people don't re-engage with it. The other problem is simply, though, that 10 grand in a bag, if I have to think about what to do with it, for almost everyone, your series of options is quite long and relatively complicated, right? I mean, imagine the situation where, maybe it's 10 grand in a bag. You wake up one morning and an elderly relative has died and left you this 10 grand in a bag. And you have to think, what do I do with it? Well, I could leave it sitting in the bag. I could leave it doing absolutely nothing. I could put it in my current account. I could put it in the savings account. I could put it in my ISA. I could contribute to a pension. On the debt side, I could pay down my mortgage. I could pay back the money I borrowed from my brother-in-law. I could pay off my credit card debt. I could put it into life insurance. I could put it into... there's a series of options, each of them on their own, quite simple. But how to decide what is appropriate to do with that money, even in the simplest financial situation, is actually a fiendishly complicated decision. And what most of us will do when we are faced with a decision that feels daunting and complex is we'll step away from it. We'll stick our heads in the sand and we'll go, you know what, I'll solve that problem next year. And so what you often find, even if you do give people a visceral and a tangible 10 grand in a bag, they still might not do anything with it. Not because, almost for the opposite reason, not because it's now out of sight, out of mind, but because they're scared of the complexity of trying to deal with all those choices of what I do with it. So I think we need to do two things. One, we need to make it tangible, as you've said. But two, we really need to build for people tools that help them, that do the heavy lifting for them, that go, here's what an advisor is a tool in a sense, right?
Yeah.
An advisor, you go to an advisor and they will say, let me look at your whole financial situation. Let me talk to you about your goals and aspirations. And I will tell you what a few of the better options are for you to do with that 10 grand. But for the vast bulk of people who might be in that situation who don't have a financial advisor, we have to find ways of helping them to narrow the option set, because that sort of complexity of decision making, people will just step away from it. They will just leave it, and that money will sit in the bag, or it'll sit in the current account, or even worse, it'll just be spent, because if it's there and I don't know what else to do with it, and something comes along that I want to buy, then that will lead to a greater chance of impulse buying.
Yeah, okay. And I have a feeling then that your company, Oxford Risk, is well placed to help people do this type of thing, or help them make better decisions.
Well, yeah, I mean, our entire reason for existence, if you like, is to build tools to help people make better decisions.
Yeah.
And those could be people in a retail context, people who don't have advisors, people who maybe are still saving and haven't invested a lot. It could be savings decisions, it could be debt decisions, or it could be the financial advisor themselves, because financial advisors also have a very complex set of problems to solve on behalf of clients. And there are certain things that are just better done with machines. They can crunch numbers better, they can keep track of data better. Humans are just very bad at keeping track of lots and lots of moving parts. So we should use technology to help us do that. However, our view is that this is never the technology replacing the human. We're not aiming for a Terminator here. We're aiming for These are tools to help humans make better human decisions. Because some of these decisions about whether I pay back my brother-in-law or whether I put in a pension, etc., the numbers can't tell you the answer. The answer comes from what's important to you as a human. And so our goal at Oxford Risk is to build tools that embody build behavioural science and understanding and profiling into technology and use data in order to provide people with the guidance systems they need to help them more comfortably tackle this complexity that we all face in our lives.
Yeah. So, and I appreciate that this is complex, and you know, I think that all decisions are really emotional decisions. I mean, otherwise we'd all drive. You know, well, I suppose I do. We do have a Skoda in the family, you know, and I kind of always think that's a kind of a default option. It's a very sensible car. It's manufactured kind of pretty good standards, we think, and they hold their value reasonably well, and they're not too expensive, and it just kind of works. Though it wouldn't work for lots of people on lots of other reasons, and I think a lot of those reasons are emotional. It's how we feel about it, how do we look about it, how do we want to appear to the rest of the world, etc. But you know, money decisions, gosh, I mean, they come down. We've been handed down lessons by our parents. There's fear and there's greed and and it's a scary old place, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean the big cop out or the big lie that the financial services industry has been telling itself for 50 years and more is that because we've got this finance theory out there that tells us how to optimize a portfolio, and what people should do is they should seek the maximum risk-adjusted returns. And, you know, everyone, if they're being rational, will buy the thing that is numerically, quantitatively optimal for them. And it is complete nonsense. People don't buy numbers. People buy stories. People buy narratives. And every single financial decision that we make, there's a default, as you say, there's the Skoda option, the stuff that if I kind of don't know what else to do, that's what I'll default to. And unfortunately, in financial decision making, often the defaults are really expensive. So in investing, for example, a default is I just won't invest. I will sit on this in cash for the next 30 years. And that is a really, really expensive default for anyone with 30 years of investing ahead of them. But more than that, when they do get over those defaults, the things that we choose are almost never the ones that have the theoretically perfect numerical trade-offs in them. They're the ones that resonate with us emotionally. They're the ones that we feel comfortable with. This is why we all are more comfortable investing in things that, you know, our friends at the dinner party on Saturday night have told us they're invested in. It might not be the best investment in the world, but because I can justify it to myself, I'm doing that because so-and-so told me it's a good idea, and you know, that person's a mate, and I believe that they said that in good faith. These are all good reasons for me to invest in something. And so an awful lot of our money decisions are really done by what feels emotionally comfortable to us, rather than any sort of technical assumption of what the optimal decision is.
Sure. So, though I have I know part of the work that you do is something called a risk assessment, and the term makes me shudder, sadly, because you know I've worked in lots of industries. You know, I was on the lifeboat crew down here at Mudderford for 10 years, and we did risk assessments of stuff that we were getting involved in. And in fact, every time you approached a casualty vessel, that you were doing a risk assessment. You know, and just the statement, a risk assessment, kind of fills most people with fear. But the beauty is of the world, and I've been in this business since 86, I think now. And I've seen lots of stock market crashes, 87, the Black Friday there, and then, numerous over that time. And the beauty of, I think there is some simplicity available now, though, with good financial planning and even stuff that people can do themselves, that a well-diversified global equity passive tracker available at very low cost from large mutual companies now, not a recommendation, but you can Google them, would over a 30-year time horizon would serve most people very well. You know, if you look at the long-term equity return against the cash rate or the bond rates, etc., of the best indices we've got, the S&P 500 or what have you, you know, you're north of 10%. Now, yes, lots of downturns in that, but actually all you had to do really was sit on your hands, look out the window, and you know, and that's it. You know, it seems to me that we've created complexity out of something that doesn't need to be as complex as it really is.
Well, I mean, the cynic in me says there's a very good reason for the industry creating complexity, because you build a barrier between your knowledge as the sellers of these products and the knowledge out there. If it appears too simple, then everyone thinks they can do it themselves and no one makes any money off it, right? Honestly, I agree with you 100%. I think it is simple. I sometimes say that there are really only 3 rules to investing. Rule 1, put your wealth to work. Don't leave it sitting stuffed in the mattress. Don't leave it in the bag. Do something with it. Rule 2, don't put it all in one thing. Diversify, ideally as broadly as you can, because none of us have a crystal ball, and diversification is the one thing that you can do to protect yourself against calamitous downsides. So put your wealth to work, diversify. Rule 3, leave it alone. And those 3 simple rules all fall into the category of things that are simple but not easy.
Yeah.
Because all of them, I mean, that is not rocket science. Every one of those things we've understood as humans for generations. And yet we fail to do it systematically. So if you could genuinely do those 3 things as an investor, you would do better than, you know, pulling numbers out of nowhere here, but you would do better than 80 to 85% of all investors out there, and I include professional investors in that pool.
Yeah.
And yet, as humans, we fail to do it. Why? Because all of those 3 things are in their own way an emotionally uncomfortable thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Putting your money to work, taking money from somewhere safe, it's in a bank account, it's in cash, and moving it into investments feels uncomfortable because I'm going from safe to risky. Now, in the long term, of course, you need that risk, because actually the more risky thing is leaving it sitting in cash and doing nothing for 30 years. So that feels emotionally uncomfortable. Diversification is emotionally uncomfortable. Why? Because people don't like buying stuff they don't know about, that they don't have a personal story for. And so people left to their own devices do not buy diversified portfolios of good investments. They buy concentrated portfolios of nice stories.
Yeah.
And those are two very different things. And the one that's most important, perhaps, is the leave it alone. Because when you've got your 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000, depending on where you are at your life and what you've got, when that's in the market and you see the market going up and down, it is emotionally stressful. It is uncomfortable, and we feel that we should be doing something. Whereas in reality, most of the time, we should be doing nothing. So I think you're absolutely right. We need, my recommendation, I think, is exactly the same as yours. Just make it as simple as possible. Put your money to work into a diversified global tracker and leave it alone.
Yeah.
The one caveat, and this is where the risk assessment becomes important, is what you put it into can vary in terms of its risk. And the amount of risk that's right for you depends very heavily on where you are at your point in life. If you've just retired and you are pulling money off your portfolio and you need to use that to survive, you need to take less risk, because the chance of a big market drop at a time when you are actually withdrawing money from that portfolio could have very big long-term consequences for the value of that portfolio. Whereas if you are 30 years before retirement, you should be taking more risk. So I think the risk assessment is a tool to help people get to the right starting point for that investment.
Yeah. You know, for people entering retirement, which of course is most of our audience, we know statistically from the Office of National Statistics that a couple entering retirement in their 60s, one person is probably still going to survive till they're 92, 93, something like that. So they've still got 30 years in front of them. So I would argue, and I think this is where the de-risking scenario kind of gets a bit confused. I would argue that they should stay fully invested in equities for a 30-year time horizon, because it's going to be an inflation-linked return, ups and downs, etc. But I model into my financial plans, which is what I think that everyone needs to have, whether they've got an advisor or not an advisor. But in my models, I always make sure I've got 2 to 5 years worth of cash. So, which is a bit heavy because I've done all the back testing and I know it's a bit cautious, but that matched with a global equity portfolio means that when we do have the inevitable downturn, the emotional response from my client, I believe, will not be as bad as a fully invested portfolio. I.e., if someone phones me up and says, Justin, it's 2008 again and the market's down by 40%, this is just going to ruin my retirement plans. And my response needs to be at that point, has your plan changed? Because remember, we had guaranteed state pensions coming in. We had 5 years worth of cash. Therefore, most market downturns have been recovered within 17 months, I think, with the 2008 one. 73, 74, I think, was significantly longer. But most market downturns all market downturns have been temporary. They've never been permanent by the very nature of the beast. And therefore, if the cash is available to do the safe withdrawal to maintain someone's standard of living for 3 to 5 years, then hopefully they don't become so emotionally respondent to that decline in the market, or that temporary decline in the market.
Yep. I agree with that. There's a little bit hanging on that word hopefully there, of course. Now, what you've got there is a nice, clean and simple way of basically going, there's a long term that you want to grow your wealth for, and there's a shorter term that you want to protect, so you can fund things out of this cash pot. Our sort of advisor tools do very much the same thing in a slightly more sophisticated way. But what it boils down to is you basically want to protect about the next 5 years of your spending. And if you have bigger expenses that you want to fund, you've got a holiday, you've got something you want that's shorter term, the closer money is to you, the greater the proportion of it that you have to have set aside into cash. Now, a nice simple way of doing that is just let me take 5 years of spending, put that in cash. An alternative way of doing that is let me say, because all you're doing there is you're reducing the risk of the overall portfolio. So another way of doing that in an equivalent way is to say, I won't leave it in cash, I won't have a barbell portfolio, I'll leave it all invested, but I will reduce the risk of the overall investment to an appropriate level. But, I mean, the ways of getting there, there are many ways of doing it. I agree with fundamentally what you're saying. There are 2 caveats I put on it. One is the right level of risk for you to take depends on the risk that you are financially able to take, which is exactly what we've been talking about, the 5 years. So the risk I'm able to take really depends on what I need to spend in the next term, right? There is then the risk I am willing to take, and different people do ultimately have a different willingness to put their long-term portfolio at risk. So the take out the 5 years, the rest of it, whether I put that 100% in equities or 80% in equities or 60% in equities, I think there is still value to that discussion, because there are simply some people who would rather go, actually, I'm quite happy with a steady long-term thing. I don't want to take the risk in order to shoot the lights out with my long-term wealth. So that's the risk you are willing to take. And the third bit, which is your hopefully bit, is we've discussed the risk you're financially able to take, but there's also the risk you're emotionally able to take. And we would like to think that anyone in the situation you have painted would go, market drop, it's temporary, that's fine because I've got my 5 years set aside here. The problem is that risk diversifies, but anxiety doesn't. And so in that circumstance, there will be a whole lot of people, even if you tell them, well, you've still got your 5 years of spending, you don't need to touch this equity portfolio, who will nonetheless get stressed about the market drop in the equity portfolio. And so we, for example, have a tool that's a financial personality assessment. And one of the dimensions we measure is composure.
Right.
Different people have different innate levels of composure. And composure is essentially your tendency towards emotional engagement with the present. Your tendency to feel emotionally the ups and downs of the investment cycle. And you will feel that regardless of whether you've got the 5 years set aside. Because as humans, we don't diversify our anxiety. We focus on the thing that makes us anxious. Focus exclusively on that. So your solution is absolutely right. I would just sort of soften it with these two things. One is understand that people have different long-term willingness to take risk as well as the short-term needs. And two is we do have different personalities. And we don't want to take someone who's low composure and still plug their long-term stuff into a 100% equity portfolio if, regardless of the best advice you're giving them, when the markets drop, they are nonetheless going to panic and sell at the bottom, because that will be a very, very expensive learning experience for them.
Yeah. And I think also, of course, this does, a lot of our listeners will not have an advisor. Now, if you've got an advisor, if someone can come in and sit with me and talk through their anxieties and have me reassure them, and the plan is still, it's okay, we knew this was going to happen at some point in time, etc., etc. There's a whole different I often talk about climbing Everest with a Sherpa or without a Sherpa.
Yeah.
You're cool. And when the weather closes in, who would you rather be with? Which party?
But there's one other point there. It's not just with or without a Sherpa or with or without an advisor, because the emotional response to the point actually depends on emotional preparation. So there's a difference between a Sherpa that you were handed yesterday evening, the day before you climb Everest, and a Sherpa that you have spent 2 years planning the trip with, so that you know what risks are coming. And a lot of the problem with emotional responses to the market crisis is that people haven't thought about what they're going to do in that circumstances until it arrives. Whereas, and you could have an advisor who is giving you all the best advice in the world at that time of market crash. But if that advisor has not spoken to you about the possibility of that ahead of time and prepared you emotionally, then even the advice is going to have limited effect in the moment.
Absolutely.
But you're absolutely right. What do individuals do? And really, I suppose watching podcasts like this is a start, because it really is about trying to prepare yourself for the emotional certainty that you're going to be stressed at some point and anxious at some point in your financial future. And it should not come as a surprise. It's always astonishing to me when we have a market drop and suddenly every advisor in the world they wheel out their chief investment officer and have a webinar to tell people that they all need to calm down. But it seems to come as a surprise to everyone, the professionals included. Now, this should not be a surprise. If you are going to get good investment returns, you need to take risk, period. If you're going to take risk, it's not a question of if there will be times when your portfolio drops in value. There will be times when your portfolio drops in value. Now, we might not know ahead of time when they're going to come, but we definitely know they're going to come. And so this, for me, is an absolutely vital part of investing. We pay far too much attention to the question of what do I invest in, and far too little to the how am I going to cope with the inevitable periods when I'm going to have to display emotional resilience.
To the volatility of the market, and probably risk is the wrong word. The market is going to be volatile. It is what it is. We know it's going to do that. You've got to accept it. We call it the lifeboat drill. We do run through that. Right. Let's pretend it's 2008. And we're sat there,
when you talk about a lifeboat, you had your risk assessment, and yes, it's a scary thing to do. But having those things done up front are vitally important. We, as an industry, and here I use advisors and the financial industry in general, but we talk a lot about financial liquidity, and we don't think a lot about emotional liquidity. And the interesting thing is when the market drop comes, let's take September 2008 to March 2009, right? Financial crisis, everyone is running around like a headless chicken in panic, and huge numbers of people all around the world panicked, sold their portfolios, turned it all into cash at a very low value, and they didn't get reinvested for the next 10 years. It was an immensely costly thing for many people.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. Did most of those people sell because at that moment they suddenly discovered that they needed all of their investment portfolio to be liquidated in cash because they needed to spend it? In other words, did they run out of financial liquidity? No. There's a few who did. There were people who lost their jobs or people who needed that money and had circumstances of bad timing. The vast majority of people did not sell because of financial reasons. They did not run out of financial liquidity. They ran out of emotional liquidity. They got it and they weren't prepared for it. And that actually cost them an awful lot of money over the next decade.
Absolutely. No, that's wise words, and I think this is the benefit of looking back at historical performance and also the historical emotional response to that performance, to make sure that if you are faced with that, if you're facing the tiger 30 feet away, what are you going to do?
The reality is we can't predict very well our own experiences and our own feelings in those circumstances. So thinking about it ahead of time is valuable. Building for yourself a set of rules, going, let me put in place a contingency plan, your lifeboat drill. If something untoward happens, and we don't expect it to, but if it does, your exits are here, here, and here. Put on the life jacket. We all should have our own financial lifeboat drill that, in case of emergency, break glass, pull this laminated thing off the fridge, read what you've prepared earlier, because earlier, when you were writing these rules down for yourself, you were in a state of emotional calm, and you could think clearly and rationally about what the sensible thing to do is. To expect ourselves in that moment of emergency when the boat is going down, to be thinking clearly about what we should be doing is a fundamental misunderstanding of our own human behavior. We just can't do it.
Yeah.
Stress does not beget good decision making.
Yeah.
So I like the concept of writing for ourselves an investment constitution. When you've got time, ahead of time, you could do this with an advisor, you could do it by yourself, but just try and write down a set of rules that says, if this happened, here are the things I would want to do. Don't panic. Turn off Bloomberg so that you're not looking at minute by minute market updates. Take a longer view. One thing that can be useful is in moments of crisis, everyone wants to do something because we feel that if we don't do something, we're being negligent somehow. We've got this action bias. So make a list of nice, fairly innocuous housekeeping activities you could do with your portfolio so that when you feel the desperate need to do something, you don't do a very stupid something and shoot yourself in the foot. You can busy yourself by, tidying the kitchen in a financial sense, as it were.
Brilliant. Well, those are wise words, Greg, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you this morning. Where can people find out more about the work that you do at Oxford Risk?
Website is www.oxfordrisk.com. So we've got a blog on there. We frequently publish on what we believe to be the best practice particularly in the financial advice industry, but we increasingly are also working on financial well-being. So more broadly, how do you help people who maybe aren't investors or aren't advised, but who want to improve their financial decision-making. And we have quite a heavy focus as well, increasingly, on part of investing that is deeply and inherently emotional, which is sustainable and responsible investing. And these areas where people can, you can serve your financial needs, but you can also serve emotional needs and social needs in the way you invest. So it's a very behavioral thing that we focus a lot on.
That's great.
The other thing would be, I put out quite a lot on Twitter, so at Greg Davies, quite a lot of stuff that we write, but also forwarding on other things from people that I find to be of interest in this space.
Fantastic. Well, again, fantastic chatting to you. Really enjoyed it. I think it'll be a huge benefit to our listeners. Once again, thank you, Greg.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Greg as much as I did. Now, to find out more about Greg and the work he does at Oxford Risk, check out the show notes and our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk, where you'll also find some useful links. As always, if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on iTunes to help more people like you to find us, and please do share this episode with friends and family you think who may find it interesting and useful. Make sure you subscribe to catch my conversation with Dr. Maurice Summers next week. You can do so on our website or your preferred podcast player. Thanks once again to the Timeline app for sponsoring the podcast. So until next time, this is Justin King helping you feel more informed in your retirement. Oh, and before I go, we're hoping to have some live events, another live retirement cafe event, hopefully in the next few months, maybe May, June time. Please stay connected with us and hook in so that you get our regular emails and we can let you know about that. So that's the Retirement Cafe. That'll be a live event with a special guest, hopefully. And we're also hoping to have another free event available called the Life Cafe, which is a new pet project about trying to help people who want to make better decisions around their money. So stay connected to us, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.